Rain had been falling all day, leaving the air heavy and the streets slick. Through the windshield our house looked dim, the porch light off, the curtains drawn. Harold always left a light on. He said darkness made him lose his bearings. That was one of the small ways his Alzheimer's had changed our lives. Light had become our way of keeping the night at bay. My name is Eleanor Reed. I'm 65 years old, and for 40 years this house has been my world. 2 weeks ago my younger sister suffered a stroke in Seattle. I flew out the next morning and stayed until she was out of danger. Every night I called home. Our daughter Melissa had promised to stay with Harold. She told me not to worry. Focus on Aunt Carol, Mom, she'd said. Dad's in good hands. And I believed her, because she's my daughter. When I stepped out of the car, the air felt colder than it should have. I walked up the front steps, my shoes squeaking against the wet wood. The lock turned harder than usual, like it hadn't been used. Inside, the smell hit me first, stale, sour, faintly metallic, the kind of smell that shouldn't belong in a home. Harold, I called softly, no answer. The silence pressed in. Then I heard it, a dull, rhythmic sound coming from somewhere below. A soft thump. Then another. My pulse quickened. I followed the sound to the basement door. It was closed, secured with a heavy padlock on the outside, a lock I had never seen before. I froze, staring at it, unable to process what I was seeing. Then came a weak voice, muffled but familiar. Ellie, please. Everything inside me turned cold. I ran to the garage, grabbed the old crowbar from the wall, and tore at the lock, until it gave way with a sharp crack. The door swung open, and the smell grew stronger: urine, sweat, and fear. Under the single dim bulb, Harold lay on the concrete floor. His face was pale, his lips cracked, his nightshirt torn. His eyes met mine, uncertain, frightened. Is it really you? He whispered. I dropped to my knees beside him, cradling his trembling hands. It's me, Harold, I said, my voice shaking. I'm home now. The paramedics arrived within minutes of my call. I barely remember what I said to the dispatcher, only the sound of my own voice, trembling as I tried to explain that my husband had been locked in our basement. When the ambulance pulled up, the flashing lights painted our living room in red and blue. It felt like the whole world was watching. They lifted Harold onto a stretcher. His skin was cold, his pulse weak. One of the paramedics looked at me and said quietly, "He's severely dehydrated." How long has he been down there? I don't know, I stammered. I just got home tonight. At the hospital, doctors and nurses swarmed around him. Machines beeped, voices overlapped, and I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching my purse like it was the only thing keeping me upright. When a nurse finally approached, her expression was careful. "Mrs. Reed, your husband's condition is stable for now, but he's malnourished and extremely weak. We'll need to keep him under observation." She hesitated before asking, "Was anyone home with him while you were away?" "Yes," I said quickly. "Our daughter, Melissa. She stayed here to take care of him." The nurse nodded slowly. "Would you mind waiting? Someone would like to speak with you." A few minutes later, a police officer entered the waiting area. He introduced himself as Detective Aaron Cole from the Toronto Elder Protection Unit. His tone was calm but direct. "Mrs. Reed, I need to ask you some questions about your husband's care over the past 2 weeks." I explained everything: my trip to Seattle, the phone calls, Melissa's messages saying Harold was fine. As I spoke, Detective Cole jotted notes in a small black notebook, occasionally glancing up at me. When I mentioned the padlock, he paused, pen midair. "You said the basement door was locked from the outside?" he asked. "Yes, I had to break it open with a crowbar." He exchanged a quick look with another officer standing nearby. "Mrs. Reed, we'll need to take a look at your property tonight. Is that all right?" I nodded numbly. I was too tired, too afraid to argue. As they left, I turned toward Harold's hospital room. Through the glass, I could see him sleeping, frail, pale but breathing. I whispered to myself, "Hang on, Harold. We'll find out what happened, I promise." I sat in that waiting room for hours, replaying every memory I had of Melissa, my little girl with pigtails and scraped knees, who used to help her father wash the car on weekends. The girl who cried the day she left for college because she didn't want to leave us behind. Somewhere between that moment and now, something had gone terribly wrong. I just didn't know what yet. Harold and I built a quiet life. He was an architect before retirement, patient and steady, the kind of man who whistled while fixing a leaky faucet. When his memory started to fade, I promised I'd be there for him through every stage, every confusion, every forgotten name. We managed fine with routines, sticky notes, and the comfort of familiarity. Melissa knew all of that. She knew how fragile he'd become. Melissa was our only child, 37, a certified accountant at a small Toronto firm. She had a sharp mind, but lately her life revolved around her husband, Evan. He was always talking about cryptocurrency and passive income streams. I never really understood his world. He said it was the future, but his eyes lit up too much when he talked about money. Harold never liked him. He said the man had slick shoes and no solid ground. I should have listened. When my sister's stroke happened, Melissa offered to stay with Harold before I even asked. "It's fine, Mom," she said, smiling. "Dad and I will be okay. You just focus on Aunt Carol." I felt relief wash over me. Melissa knew our routines, his medications, his favorite TV shows, even the way to calm him when he got disoriented. There was no one else I would have trusted more. During the first week, she called every night. I'd hear Harold in the background, humming or watching baseball, and it warmed my heart. But by the second week, her calls stopped. She sent short texts instead. "Busy with Dad, all good. Long day, talk tomorrow." Tomorrow never came. I tried to tell myself she was just tired. Caring for someone with Alzheimer's can be exhausting. I'd been doing it for years. I knew the toll. Still, a strange unease crept in. I brushed it off, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, she was my daughter. What reason would she have to hurt us? Now, sitting in that hospital hallway, I realized that blind trust might have been my biggest mistake. The next morning, after Harold was settled in the hospital, I drove back home with Detective Cole and another officer. The house looked so ordinary from the outside, like nothing bad could ever happen there. Inside, it felt hollow, stripped of warmth. Every shadow seemed sharper now that I knew what had been hiding in the dark. The officers took photographs of the basement, the broken padlock, the thin blanket, the bucket in the corner. One of them looked up at me, his face pale. "He must have been down here for days," he murmured. I couldn't answer. My throat burned. When they left to file their report, I stayed behind. I needed to understand. I walked from room to room, touching things that suddenly felt foreign. Harold's reading glasses on the counter, his unfinished crossword, the empty space where his medication tray should have been. That was when I noticed Melissa's laptop sitting open on the kitchen table. For a moment I hesitated. I didn't want to invade her privacy. But then I remembered the lock, the bucket, my husband's cracked lips whispering my name. I opened the laptop. Her desktop was cluttered with folders, spreadsheets, and PDFs. One folder caught my eye, household finances. Inside were scanned documents, bank statements, property records, and something that made my stomach twist, a power of attorney form. My name and Harold's signatures were on it, shaky but unmistakable. The witness signature belonged to someone named D. Marsh, Notary Public. I had never heard of him. Scrolling further, I found another file labeled Equity Loan Approved. The amount, $100,000. Then transfers $75,000 here, $25,000 there, all moved to an account called Brooks Capital Fund. Evan's name was listed as the manager. I felt my pulse in my ears. They had used Harold's illness to steal from us, from him, from our future. My hands trembled as I kept reading. There were emails between Melissa and Evan discussing fund movement and cover stories. And then, a message thread that made my blood run cold. "Evan, he keeps asking for Ellie. What if someone hears him?" "Melissa, he'll forget. He always does. Just a few more days, then we're gone." Gone. The word echoed in my head. They were planning to leave, to disappear. I opened their internet history search results for countries without extradition, cheap apartments, Lisbon, one-way flights from Toronto. I felt my knees weaken. My daughter, my only child, she had done this. I called Detective Cole immediately. My voice shook as I told him what I'd found. Within an hour, he was back at the house with a forensic tech. They copied the files, took the laptop, and photographed everything. "Mrs. Reed," Detective Cole said gently, "I need you to prepare yourself. This isn't just neglect. It looks like a deliberate scheme, financial exploitation and unlawful confinement. We'll issue warrants for both Melissa and her husband." I nodded, numb. When they left, I sank onto the couch, staring at the empty doorway to the basement. I thought of Harold, lying there helpless, and of Melissa's tiny hands holding mine the day she was born. How could those two memories belong to the same person? The house was silent again, but this time I heard something worse than the thumping in the dark. I heard the sound of trust breaking. 2 days later, Detective Cole called just after dawn. His voice was steady but low. Mrs. Reed, we've located them. Your daughter and son-in-law were arrested at Pearson Airport about an hour ago. They had one-way tickets to Lisbon. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I just sat there at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee in front of me until it went cold. I should have felt relief, but all I felt was exhaustion. My daughter, the little girl who once wrote me Mother's Day cards in crayon, was in police custody for trying to flee the country after locking her father in a basement. When I arrived at the station later that day, Detective Cole briefed me on what they'd uncovered. Melissa and Evan had drained nearly $175,000 from our savings and the home equity loan. Every cent had been funneled into Evan's company, Brooks Capital Fund. It wasn't a legitimate business at all. It was a shell part of a larger Ponzi scheme targeting elderly investors. Melissa had helped create fake accounting reports to make the fund look real. Evan's facing multiple counts of fraud, Cole said. But what your daughter did, taking advantage of her father's Alzheimer's, forging his signature, and locking him away, it's going to carry heavy charges. Elder abuse, financial exploitation, unlawful confinement. He paused. They planned to disappear, Mrs. Reed. They rented an apartment in Lisbon under fake names. If you hadn't come home early, I don't think Harold would have survived another week. The words sank in slowly, painfully. I had left 2 weeks ago, thinking I was helping my sister, but if I'd stayed away a few days longer, my husband might have died. My daughter would have been gone, living a new life funded by our suffering. That night, I sat beside Harold's hospital bed. His skin looked a little less pale, but his hands still shook. When I brushed his hair back, he opened his eyes just long enough to whisper, "Ellie?" "I'm here," I said softly. "You're safe now." He drifted back to sleep, and I held his hand long after the room went quiet. The monitors beeped in rhythm with my heartbeat. I didn't know what hurt more, the betrayal itself or the truth that I hadn't seen it coming. For the first time in my life, I felt like a stranger in my own family. The weeks that followed felt like a blur of paperwork, court dates, and sleepless nights. Reporters called our home, neighbors whispered, and every time the phone rang, my chest tightened. I had never imagined our family's name would end up in a courtroom transcript, let alone for something like this. Evan pled guilty first. His lawyer arranged a deal in exchange for full cooperation. He admitted to running a Ponzi scheme that targeted retirees and vulnerable investors, promising high returns on cryptocurrency trades that never existed. Melissa had helped him design fake statements and launder the money through her accounting firm. She was the one who suggested using Harold's condition to access our savings without raising suspicion. When Detective Cole told me that, I felt the air leave my lungs. "She planned it," I whispered. "It wasn't just him." He nodded sadly. "Yes, ma'am. According to Evan, it was her idea from the start." By the time the case went to trial, Evan had already been sentenced to 8 years in prison. Melissa, on the other hand, refused to plead guilty. Her defense argued that she was a victim of emotional manipulation, that Evan had coerced her, but the evidence said otherwise. The courtroom was cold the day I testified. I sat in the witness box, my palms slick with sweat, and recounted how I found Harold, how I broke the lock, how I discovered the files on her laptop. Each word felt like a knife twisting deeper. When the prosecutor asked if I saw my daughter in the room, I pointed to her without hesitation. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Then came the hardest part, the video footage from our basement. The jury watched in silence as images of the concrete floor, the bucket, and Harold's trembling body filled the screen. I couldn't look. I just stared at the floor and listened to the quiet sobs around me. Melissa took the stand the next day. She cried, said she only wanted to help her father manage finances and made mistakes out of love. But when the prosecutor read her own text messages aloud, he'll forget. Just a few more days, the courtroom fell silent. There was nothing left to defend. The verdict came after 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts: elder abuse, financial exploitation, fraud, and unlawful confinement. The judge, a composed woman in her 60s, looked at Melissa for a long moment before speaking. "Ms. Brooks," she said, "you are an intelligent woman. You understood your father's vulnerability and chose to exploit it for personal gain. You betrayed the trust not only of your family but of this entire community. This court finds no mitigating circumstances." She sentenced Melissa to 12 years in federal prison. I didn't cry when I heard the number. I thought I would. Instead, I felt a strange calm, like the storm had finally broken and left only quiet behind. As officers led Melissa out, she turned toward me. Her lips moved, whispering, "Mom, please." I looked right at her and shook my head. There was nothing left to say. After the sentencing, the prosecutor, Ms. Hanley, approached me in the hallway. "Mrs. Reed," she said gently, "you did the right thing. What happened to your husband could have been fatal." I nodded, though my voice barely came out. "Justice isn't supposed to feel this heavy." She smiled sadly. "Real justice never does." That night, I went home alone. The house was still, but this time the silence wasn't frightening. It was the sound of something ending and maybe, in a small way, something beginning again. Months passed after the trial, but the weight of everything lingered like a shadow that refused to lift. Harold came home from the hospital weaker than before. His hands trembled when he tried to hold a spoon, and sometimes he looked at me with eyes that seemed lost in another time. The doctors said the trauma had worsened his Alzheimer's. I didn't need them to tell me. I could see it every day. We hired a part-time nurse to help with his care. I sold Harold's old car and some of my jewelry to pay the legal bills. The savings were gone, and the house now carried a loan I never wanted. Still, I tried to keep things normal. I cooked his favorite meals, played his records in the morning, and read aloud from the newspaper, even when I wasn't sure he understood. Some days he smiled. Other days he asked where Melissa was. "She went away for work," I would say. "She'll be gone for a while." It was easier than telling him the truth. Some days I almost wished I could forget like he did. People asked if I'd visited her in prison. I haven't, and I don't plan to. I wrote one letter months ago, but I tore it up before I finished. I didn't know what to say. How do you write to someone who took the person you love and locked them in the dark? How do you talk to your own child after that? At night, when the house is quiet and Harold is asleep, I sit by the window and look at the small garden we planted years ago. The roses are still blooming, stubborn and bright against the frost. I take comfort in that. Life, even bruised, has a way of growing back. Sometimes I think about the little girl Melissa used to be, the one who used to run barefoot through those same roses, laughing when Harold chased her with the watering can. I hold on to that image because it's the only version of her I can still love. Forgiveness isn't impossible, but right now it feels too far away. Tonight the house is quiet again. Harold is asleep in his chair, his breathing soft and steady. I sit across from him, the lamplight flickering over the photographs on the mantel. There's one of the three of us at the beach, Melissa, no older than 10, grinning between us, her arms wrapped around our waists. For a long time I couldn't look at that photo. Now I do. Not because it hurts less, but because I've learned pain doesn't erase love. It only changes its shape. I used to think justice meant punishment, but I've come to see it differently. Justice, at least for me, is protecting what's left when love has been betrayed. It's making sure that people like Harold, like me, are not forgotten when trust turns to cruelty. It's standing up even when it breaks your heart. 12 years. That's how long my daughter will spend behind bars. I can't say if it's enough or too much. All I know is that every day she's there, I hope she remembers what she took from us, not just the money or the house, but time. 2 weeks of our lives that she turned into a nightmare. As for me, I'm still here, still waking up early to make Harold's coffee, still humming when I fold the laundry, just to fill the silence. We lost so much, but we're still together, and that, in its own quiet way, is justice. If you've listened this far, thank you. Hold tight to the people who love you honestly. And if this story meant something to you, share it. Someone out there might need to